Now, in this video, we will discuss the concept of aggregate turnover. Aggregate turnover is defined in section 2, subsection 6 of GST Act 2017. This video is useful to CA intermediate student. Before going into the details of what are the things to be considered in aggregate turnover, what are the things to be eliminated from aggregate turnover, not to be considered in aggregate turnover, let's first understand what is the relevance of the aggregate turnover. Why we need to learn this concept of aggregate turnover. 1. GST registration. If the aggregate turnover exceeds rupees 20 lakh, the person needs to get himself registered mandatorily under GST. Composition scheme. This composition scheme is beneficial. It is covered by section 10 of GST Act. The person is eligible to get himself registered under composition scheme if the aggregate turnover is less than 1.5 crores in the immediately preceding financial year. E-invoice applicability. If the aggregate turnover exceeds rupees 5 crores, then the person needs to do the compliances of e-invoice. Annual return and audit requirement. If the aggregate turnover is above 2 crores rupees, then the person needs to file GSTR 9. GSTR 9 is a sum of 12 months return. If the aggregate turnover exceeds rupees 5 crores, then the person needs to file the GSTR 9. GSTR 9C. GSTR 9C is a form which gives the reconciliation between GST and books of accounts. 5 different types of reconciliations are there. If the aggregate turnover is more than 5 crores, then the person needs to file GSTR 9C before 31st December following the financial year. Therefore, it is relevant to understand what are the things, how to compute the aggregate turnover, what are the things to be added in the aggregate turnover, what are the things to be eliminated or not to be considered in the aggregate turnover. What are the things to be included in the aggregate turnover? One is taxable supplies. All taxable supplies, including distinct persons, transaction, including the supplies between distinct person. For example, if the entity is having a same PAN, is having one unit in Maharashtra, another unit in Karnataka. If the Maharashtra unit supplies certain things to Karnataka unit, this will not come as a turnover in the financial statement, but this will be considered while computing the aggregate turnover. Then exempt supply. What is exempt supply? GST rate is nil, is exempt supply, and if it is fully exempt by exemption notification under section 6 or section 11 of under section 6 of CGST Act or section 11 of IGST Act. Wholly exempt, not partially exempt. And non-taxable supplies. Non-taxable supplies means the supplies on which there is no levy under GST, which are outside the GST purview. That is alcohol for human consumption, natural gas, petroleum products, etc. That is, even if there is no levy, it is to be considered while computing the aggregate turnover. And zero rated supplies to SEZ unit and export, that is to be added in the aggregate turnover. Outward supply on which tax is payable by the recipient under RCM. For example, a GTA service provider. The taxes are paid by the recipient, but this is to be considered in the aggregate turnover of GTA service provider, not by the recipient. Job work charges. In case of job work, the charges is to be considered in the aggregate turnover, not the cost of the material on which he is doing the job work. What are the things to be excluded? Things to be excluded is the recipient who is paying the taxes under RCM are not to be considered in the aggregate turnover. Then transactions under Schedule 3. What are the transactions under Schedule? The activities or transactions and which are covered under Schedule 3 are deemed not to be considered as supply of goods or supply of services. What are those transactions? Is high C sales. Then suppose I purchased the material from Singapore, exported it to Dubai, but that material didn't come into India, bill of entry for home consumption is not filed. Those transactions are not to be considered while computing the aggregate turnover. And the cost of material in case of job work. In accounting also, we are not adding that in the turnover, but only the job work charges need to be considered in the aggregate turnover, not the cost of the material itself. Let's have a look on the two examples and what is the amount of aggregate turnover in those examples. 1. Interstate supply 7 lakh rupees, export supply 4 lakh rupees, exempt services 3 lakh rupees, high C sale 7 lakh, job work material amount 45 lakh. These last two elements is a high C sale. High C sale is covered under schedule 3. That is not to be added in the cost of while calculating aggregate turnover. Cost of material in case of job work is not to be added in the aggregate turnover, and therefore the aggregate turnover is 14 lakh, which is first three elements: interstate taxable supply, export supply, export services. These three elements will be considered in aggregate turnover. Last two elements, that is high C sale, is covered under schedule 3, is not to be considered as supply of goods or supply of services. Deemed, there is dimming fiction. Job work material amount is not to be considered in the aggregate turnover. Let's take another, the second example, that is supply by unit A to unit B having same pair, which is considered as distinct entity, 7 lakh rupees. Supply to ACZ unit 0 rated 4 lakh rupees. Advocate service received RCM 3 lakh rupees. Supply of alcohol for human consumption 15 lakh rupees. Job work charges 2 lakh rupees. Exempt goods 9 lakh rupees. So in this example, the advocate service received on which a GST is payable under reverse charge mechanism of rupees 3 lakh is not to be considered in aggregate turnover. Similarly, supply of alcohol for human consumption, this is a non-leviable, this is not leviable under GST, but it will be considered in the aggregate turnover. Job work charges will be considered in the aggregate turnover. Exempt goods will be considered in the aggregate turnover. So in this example, what will not be considered is advocate service received on which tax is payable by the recipient of supply will not be included in the aggregate turnover. All other elements will be included in the aggregate turnover. If you are having any questions regarding GST, please contact me. This is my email ID. My phone number and my cell number is 8080980684. You can contact me between 9:30 p.m. to 10 p.m. I will definitely answer your question on the GST. Thank you.